Good Erev Shabbos, and by the time you will be listening to this, it probably be Motzei Shabbos. Welcome to today's shiur, and this is for Parshas Vayakhel-Pekudei, which then is there for Chazak. It's also Parshas HaChodesh, which is also Parshas is Shabbos Mevorchim of Chodesh Nisan. As I mentioned last week, this week is also the sponsorship of Beis Torah Chabad, which offers a Challah answering service, especially for those living in remote places. And they are open from 10 a.m. to 10 p.m. Their telephone number in America is +1, then 347-688-7917. And the feedback which we've been receiving has been very encouraging. So feel free to use their service. And if you have any feedback, you're welcome to come back to me about it. Okay, so the first thing I want to deal with is about last week, we were talking about separating Challah. I shared that was written in contemporary Sforim, that if you receive several amounts of shlachmonis from different people, and then you put them all into one large bag, one large basket, then you may be incurring a chiyuv Challah. To which I responded that various mitigating factors, that's Tzemach Tzedek who says that on a sweet cake, there's no chiyuv Challah, and also the fact that let's say your shlachmonis typically will be the pieces of pastry will be inside a plastic bag. So whereas there is a concept of shiur of sal, that one basket makes all its contents as a single unit, but then there may be, if each of the small quantities is in a separate plastic bag, so the smaller salim, the smaller baskets, kalim, should serve to obstruct the becoming of one unit through the larger basket. So again, there is a concept of shiur of sal. When you've got little kalim inside the sal, and those kalim are closed, then they wouldn't allow the development of the shiur of sal to become as a single unit. And therefore, because they don't become a single unit, therefore there's no chiyuv Challah. Then we had a discussion about stuff in the freezer, but meanwhile, one of our listeners, Rav Remy Kievman, pointed out to me that he sent me a link, a video of the Rebbe taking the mafresh Challah. And this is the days leading to Pesach. The Rebbe would distribute Shmura Matzo to Chassidim, and he would send also to not only those who are local, was given out on Erev Pesach Mamish. And then for further afield, people would come a few days before Pesach. There would be a session where, particularly Bochurim going home to their parents for Pesach, would bring home to various communities. Apparently, before doing so, the Rebbe takes Challah from the matzahs. So once a year, the Rebbe had the opportunity to be mafresh Challah. And so there, the matzahs are all in separate boxes. So, and how does that fit with what I've said here, that separate kalim prevent shiur of sal happening? So I want to I'm going to share with you my initial response, although it's a little bit more complex than I thought it was, having spent time looking through. Now, there's two separate dinim here. One is to create a chiyuv Challah, and the other one is when you are mafresh Challah, it is recommended what's called min hamukaf, that the various foods which you are including, whether it's in truma or meiser or Challah, that they should be close by. so that when you are taking challah or taking truma, it should be for this for it should be the stuff being included with this mitzvah should be local. So it's not to create a new unit, but rather it is to take challah on that which is present. Now, what you can see here on the screen is from the Nitei Gavriel on Hilchos Pesach, and the second quote, "Hamatzos shelonu shemanochim b'tech kufsa." He writes that matzahs which are in a box, as they are wrapped in a thin paper, it's not necessary to tear the paper. It's enough that the box should be open. And he, in the footnote Yudches, which I have on the screen, he brings here from Mikroy Kodesh, which was Rav Pesach Frank, the Rov of Anash, that he doesn't see the paper wrapping around the matzahs as a keli. And then it brings another svara, another from Shastra Kinyan Torah, the Rov of Strasbourg, who says you don't have to even open the carton because it's open the carton is just a wrapper, but it's not a keli. Okay, be that as it may. So first of all, here I looked at the video, and you have, let's say, 20 boxes, and those boxes were open. And inside, the matzahs were not in separate boxes. The matzahs were in packages, round packages of brown paper. I don't know how many matzahs per pack. And then, before the Rebbe takes challah from the whole lot, there's a large sheet of brown paper, which is covering the whole lot. And that's as an alternative to tzir of sal, an alternative to putting everything into one basket. There's another way of covering them all with one cloth, and that brings them all to one unit. And as I said here, it's not a tzir of sal, which is necessary for to create a unit. It's rather to create a situation of mahafrish min hamukov. Okay, now I look at this is actually discussed quite in detail in Alter Rebbe's Shulchan Aruch, in Hilchos Pesach, Simon Tov Nun Zayin. So there is a difference between Chalas Eretz Yisrael and Chalas Chutz La'aretz. Chalas Chutz La'aretz, the concept of Min Hamukov, is not required. And there is this concept of Chalas Chutz La'aretz, Oichel v'hoilech v'achakaf mafrish. So if you come, let's say it comes a Friday, and for some reason, Friday night, you realize, oops, we didn't take challah, we weren't mafrish challah from the Shabbos challahs. Are we allowed to eat the challahs? And the answer is yes, provided you put aside one roll, whatever, you put it aside, and you're going to take challah from that after Shabbos. So again, chalas chutz la'aretz, oichel v'hoilech, you're allowed to eat from the on-chalad, so should we say, dough, bread, provided achakach mafresh, you'll be mafresh later. That you can do. Now, obviously, if on Motzei Shabbos, I'm going to take challah from that one roll, well, the rest of that batch is not only not here, it's already been digested. So chalas chutz la'aretz, the concept of oichel v'hoilech achakach mafresh, is not imperative. Sorry, the concept of min hamukif is not imperative. The Chal says Israel it is, at least, yeah. But then there's a little bit more. Well, this is where I was a little bit. It was news to me. When you have one batch of dough made into separate loaves, and now some of them are here, some of them are not here, and you took challah from what is here, and some of the stuff is in a different place or even digested. That is okay. It does cover. But if it's from two batches, so let's say I made on Friday, I made two batches of challah on Thursday, and I forgot to take challah from either of them. And now comes on Shabbos. All right, so I put aside one roll. Can this hafrosha from this one challah cover for both batches? I don't know how you say the word mechutin in English. How does this roll, as you got batch A and batch B, and I put aside one roll from batch B, and I'm mafresh challah from that roll from batch B. How does that hafrosha challah have anything to do with batch A? It has nothing to do with it. So because of this, in case when you got not just one batch, but several batches, it is imperative that they should be close by. And so typically, in the case with the Rebbe, with the matzahs, there's a batch of dough made for they call it in Yiddish amayre, and that's typically made less than a shiur challah, whatever it may be. And then you've got several batches. And so to be able to be mafresh challah take one piece of matzah for all the rest of the matzah, if there wouldn't be some similar thing to tzir of sal, so then how could taking a piece of matzah from batch A cover for batch B and so on? Therefore, yes, indeed, in such a situation, it is imperative to combine them, and that's what they were doing there, covering the boxes of challah, the boxes of matzah with a large sheet of brown paper, the equivalent of a tablecloth, to make them all into one unit. Okay, I know it's a little bit complex. I think we'll leave it with that, and we'll go on to the next thing. It's geschmack to learn new things. Right. So the next thing which I want to relate to is this past week, like Darshan Smuchin, already talking about Hafrosh Challah. I got a question from someone, a Shlucha, who had prepared a batch of 9 cups of flour. Well, she's American, so she works with cups. I haven't learned how to translate from cups into grams, into ounces, etc. But she tells me that is on the margin. Let's say it is a shiur challah. It's a sofek shiur challah. But what was significant is that she had made into batches. What was significant is that she made the dough for cookies with oil and egg, no water, no yes, no other. Perhaps if you use a fruit juice which is made from concentrate, it's just oil and oil as in not olive oil, vegetable oil. So she's asking about separating challah and with a brocho. So I want to address this, and that is that there is a sofek in shulchan in poskim whether a batch of dough made with liquids other than the shiva mashkin. As you know, the 7 mashkin are yad shechat dam, yain, dvash, which is dvash, dvorim, yain, dvash, shemen, which is shemen zayis, ches stands for cholov, tes stands for tal, dam, and mayim. So don't worry about the dam for the moment. That's talking about tumah of tumah. Doesn't matter. You have a list of 7 liquids which are recognized as mashkin, as liquids in Torah, and they will serve to combine a quantity of flour to become a single batch. If it were made of, if this batch of flour, with the right quantity of flour, but it was mixed just with fruit juice and not with one of the 7 mashkim, eggs counts of fruit juice, then there is a sofek whether it becomes a batch, whether it's chayiv v'challah, machlekes the rosh, etc. And so I'm just to make life simple. I've got here on the screen from Kitzur Shulchan Aruch. Let's read it carefully. If a dough was made kneaded with eggs or other fruit juice, there are several sveikas, several doubts whether it's chayiv v'challah, and then also if it doesn't become tomei, then you can't burn it, etc. Therefore, when you are making such a dough, such a pastries with margarine, etc., should mix in ktsas mayim, a little bit of water, or a little bit of milk, or a little bit of honey, bees honey, or a little bit of wine, or a little bit of olive oil. Once there's even a very small amount of any of those liquids, then mafrishin Challoh mimena Challah bivrocha. Then you could be mafrish Challah with a brocha. If not, you wouldn't be able to, because as I said, there's a suffix where the May Paris serves to constitute a dough which is chayiv v'challah. On the other hand, to not take challah, b'shet is chayiv v'challah. So because of them, we try to avoid that situation. Right. Let's move on. And that is a young lady whose birthday happens to be in the month of Adar, was given a gift of a necklace which has a pendant in the form of Pisces, which is fish, which is the mazel of, in the zodiac, is the mazel of Chodesh Adar. Now, the mazel, the concept of the constellations of stars is mentioned also in Rambam as a very early recognition of the, I call it the wallpaper of the heavens, and they kind of move around. So the wallpaper at a given time of the year, at the time of the beginning of the day, is going to be different wallpaper, and it rotates in approximately 365 days. It comes back again. It's very slightly less than the annual cycle, and therefore it's slightly off the way it was 5,000 years ago, but fine. But meanwhile, we have these mazolis, and now it does say Shulchan that we're not allowed to make images of the bodies in heaven. Now, we also know that we're not meant to make images of human. The sculpture of a human person, of a human being, you're allowed to make a two-dimension image, like in other words, to paint on a canvas, that's okay, or to embroider on a canvas, that's okay, that's considered two-dimensional. But to sculpt out of, whether it's of stone or of metal, to create wood, to create a sculpture of a human being, we're not allowed to. Fine. That's called three-dimension. We are also not allowed to make an image of the shemesh and the reach and the kechovim of the mazolos. This is also in Shulchan Aruch, in Siman Kuf Mem Aleph. We're not allowed to make images of the mazolos. So when you draw, let's say, a picture of the sun, so we typically make a half a sun, not to avoid this shiur of drawing an image of the sun. So without going into that whole discussion, meanwhile, here's the question, that this is an image of one of the mazolos, the constellation of Pisces, the constellation of Dogim, and is it permitted to have such an image? So just to finish off that point about the two-dimension, three-dimension, whereas an image of a human in two-dimension is permitted, a two-dimension image of the sun and the moon is not permitted. The reason being that when we look at humans, we normally see them in three-dimension. Therefore, a two-dimension image is not a realistic image. By contrast, when we look at the heavenly bodies, because of the distance, we're not seeing depth, and it's as if we're just looking at a canvas. So we see them in two-dimension. Therefore, to make a two-dimension drawing is forbidden. Okay. So meanwhile, so we have here in Shulchan Aruch, it said you're not allowed to make a sculpture of a human being, but suras, behemoths, v'chayos, but images of animals we are permitted to make. As someone pointed out to me on Wednesday, we have this story about the throne of Shlomo HaMelech, which had images of lions, etc., on the steps as he would ascend the throne. I believe it's actually described in Targum Sheni to Megillah. So I remember for years ago. So because the throne of Shlomo HaMelech arrived in Persia through Nebuchadnezzar, etc. Let's come back. So now it does say Shulchan Aruch, whereas images of humans you are not allowed to make, images of images of uh, images of animals we're not allowed to make. So we are allowed to make, yeah? We are allowed to make images of animals. Right. So sorry about that delay. So it says you're allowed to make images of animals. Says the Shach, mashma, that even an image of a lion is permitted. And so writes the Rashba in the Tshuva Simchov Zayin. However, the Bach, Rebbe Circus, in his commentary on the Torah, in Kuntras Achron, he says, no, it's not allowed to, because we're not allowed to make images of the celestial bodies. He calls them the Moder HaTacht, the lower level, the lower dwelling, because we've got the Moder HaElyon would be where the higher abode would be where there's a presence of Malochim, and the lower abode would be where there's a presence of the what we call the celestial bodies, the sun, moon, stars, etc. So we're not allowed to make images of the mazolos in the heaven. And the Mazel Ari, and it comes the month of Av, so the Leo, that's standing in the heaven, and you have the ox, Taurus, in Chodesh Iyar. So we're not allowed to make images of a lion or nor of an ox because they are of the mazolos. Says that's the Bach. So the Shach responds. He says, according to you, you wouldn't be allowed to make any of the 12 mazolos even as individually. We never heard anyone who's particular about that. And therefore, he concludes that which we're not allowed to create images of the mazolos, that's only if you make all of them together. If you make a compendium of the whole zodiac together in image form, or actually possibly, I don't know, I haven't thought about it, possibly even in two-dimensional, it wouldn't be okay. And he says similarly to the Arbo Aponim Lahadodi on the heavenly throne as described in Novi, it's got Pnei Shoy Yomin Pnei Aryeh, sorry, Pnei Shoy Pnei Shoy Pnei Aryeh Me'ayom Pnei Shoy Ma'asmoil and Pnei Nesha and Pnei Odom. To make those four images together, that's forbidden. But one on its own is okay. So therefore, the conclusion here is that you are allowed to have, according to the Shach, this necklace pendant of Pisces is permitted because it's just one mazel of the lot. Okay. If I may just throw in a light-hearted comment. I had a discussion in a class about if you have a picture of a fish let's say, pressed into a cookie, whether you're allowed to eat the cookie on Shabbos, erasing the image. Then let's go to the next step. What happens if you have a cookie made in the shape of a fish? Are you allowed to eat it? Then I go, what about a fish which is in the shape of a fish? Are you allowed to eat the fish? So obviously you're allowed to eat fish on Shabbos, even though you're demolishing the tzir. So a cookie made in the shape of a fish shouldn't be more chomer than eating a fish. Right, let's move on. Now, I'm going on to Shiloh number 4. There's a man who lives alone, and therefore he lights Shabbos candles each Friday. And it happened one Friday that he forgot, he didn't light. So the question is, does he have to henceforth light a candle, an extra candle every Friday? Now, because there is this minig brought down in the Ramor, minig Ashkenaz. I don't know whether it's by Sfardim is also, I don't know, I haven't explored that if a woman misses Ner Shabbos, so she from then onwards she would add an extra candle every Erev Shabbos. Generally, the attitude is we try to find kulus because women do find it upsetting to have to add another candle, perhaps embarrassing. I think we discussed this once a year ago, how not to feel bad about it. It's not as if there's a knas, a punishment, to leave a candle present unlit. That would be embarrassing. Here, it's on the contrary. When you do tshuva, you add light into the world. So it's a negative has become a positive. So but there are ways of looking at it in a positive way. But still, we try to wherever if it's to be makel, it's not to have to bring on this knas. So here the question is: does it apply to a man too? There is a sefer, a short, small paperback sefer Neres Shabbos Halocho, written by a Choshev Rov in called Rebbe Gedalia Oberlander. Used to be in Monsey, now leading a very sizable community in Kingston, Pennsylvania. And in this volume on Neres Shabbos, he had taken the view that it applies to men equally. And after all, the shiur of Neres Shabbos applies to the man. He's the balabais, so he's meant to provide the resources to run the home. And therefore, it's his achrayas. Now, of course, he allows the woman; he gives her the shlichus. But then, why should a man be less responsible than a woman when it comes to this? So, the history of this is a minig shenagu hanoshim. This idea of having to add an extra candle is a minig shenagu hanoshim. And this is very interesting. I haven't heard that if someone overslept or missed Krishma, he should henceforth say Krishma twice every day, or to say or whatever. If a person missed a mitzvah, where else do you see that if you missed out on a mitzvah, henceforth you have to add? But so here's something unique. Now, everyone is familiar, the Mishnah, that here's the Mishnah Shabbos, is Daf Lamed Aleph, I think. Al Sholosh Averis is for 3 sins, women succumb, Chmon Litzlan, in childbirth, and that is for neglect in the 3 mitzvahs of Nida, Challah, and Hadlachas Haner. And then what you have below is from the Yerushalmi. I'm sure you've heard this before, but it's also in Midrashim. It says these 3 mitzvahs which are entrusted to Noshim, Nida, Challah, and Hadlachas Haner. So it says, Odom Harishon, Domo Shel Oilom. He was like the blood of the world. Because what's it mean? It means the life fluid. Because when Adam was until Adam was created, there was no rain happening. And when Adam was born, then the Eidialam in Haaretz, then a vapor rises from the earth, and then it becomes rain, and it irrigates the earth, and that causes growth. Chava, through the Eitz Hadas, encouraging him to eat from the Eitz Hadas, caused death to Adam, and he's the blood of the world. Therefore, she has the mitzvah of Nida, which has got to do with blood. Then Challah. Adam Harishon is the Challah Tahoira. He was Hashem's Challah. What does that mean? Well, Adam Harishon is taken. Hashem takes the dust of the earth and mixes it with water. And as the Rambam says, the Adam Mimokem Kaparos Nivra, that the earth for the formation of Adam is from the site of the Mizbeach and Har HaMoriah, the site of the Mizbeach and Beis HaMikdash. And what I didn't know, one of the fortune says that the water, as you're familiar, there's a constant whole story that they made to him, the water, the depth, which deep down beneath the Mizbeach, the whole story of David HaMelech when he's digging to to create the Mizbeach, to build the Mizbeach in advance. The whole story where he dug, and then the water starts kind of flooding, and that's where the Shehamalas, the whole story with Achitophel. So you got the Mei Tahoim. So one of the Mephoshim says that this Mei Tahoim was also involved in the formation of Adam. So it's offer and water. This water was the Mei Tahoim. And anyone who's learned a bit of Chassidus, Maim, Tachtoinim, Tzoyakim, Anon, Ba'inul, Me'evik, Hamim, Malko. So this Mei Tahoim signifies the water below, when Hashem has separated the lower and the upper waters, and the lower water yearning to be connecting with Hashem. And so Adam Hak is created as a Hashem's Challah, earth and water. And he quotes that once you've already mixed a bit of water into your dough, so then you can be mafresh challah. So Adam Rishon is Hashem's challah, created this formation of clay to create a human being. And Chava, through Geit Hadas, caused his death, and therefore she has the mitzvah of challah, to be metakin, that there was a Hashem's challah was caused to pass away, so she brings a challah. Thirdly, Adam Harishon is called Hashem's light, Neir Shel Olam. Shene'emar Neir Elikim Nishmas Adam. The human soul is like a godly light, which gives a sense of direction to the world. And because Chava was instrumental in his passing, therefore she has the mitzvah of Neir. So these are this is the background why these three mitzvahs are so important for an Isha. And we've got the Mishnah, which doesn't say very good things about the neglect of those mitzvahs. So it makes sense that if a woman realized that she had neglected one of those mitzvahs, as in Hadlochas Haner, she wants to do something to rectify the omission. And so there's the resolve, you know what, from now on, I'm going to add another candle. And that's a way of her doing what she can to increase in her schus of Hadlochas Haner. As having said all that, I'd like to contend that it doesn't apply to men. It's a minig hanoshim, and it's clearly dafka because it's kind of a tikkun for neglect of something which is a special mitzvah given to noshim, rather than to rectify the omission of a mitzvah. As I said, other mitzvahs, if you have omitted, we don't see there's a special takana of henceforth. That's true, yes. Right. Let's move on. So may a husband buy his wife a gift for Yom Tov, but she is in the year of Avelis. That was the question. So this you have on the screen. It's from Nite Gabriel. He says it is permitted, but I'd like to go through the reasons why he says. One is, he says, it's a priyas choiv. It's to pay a debt. He owes it to her to give her this gift. From time to time, there's a husband owes it. That's really why I'm going into this. I don't know who's listening, the men or the wives or the husbands. There is Simchas Yom Tov, a husband has a duty to be mesameach his wife. And so it's a priyas choiv. And he refers to the Divrei Malkiel, in Chelek Hey Simer Lashem Zayin, which I've mentioned recently. This Divrei Malkiel, Rov in Lomje, and the comment there is about shlachmonos to a Rov in the year of Avelis. The Rebbe once sent shlachmonos to one of the Rebbes in New York, who was in the year of Avelis, and the Rebbe said to the shliach, if he asks about he's in the year of Avelis, the Divrei Malkiel says it is okay. And the reason which Dayan Raskin gives is it's an opportunity for comes Purim. People benefit from the input of a Rov in their lives, and they want to have an opportunity to show appreciation, to repay some kind of debt of appreciation. And therefore it comes Purim in the Shana Shlachmonas. That's the way of their sending their show of appreciation. And he calls that a priyas choiv. It's not like just reus, a friendship, but it's also a form of a debt. So he says also a husband to his wife has a duty, as a debt, to give her gifts mizman mizman. Then he also brings that comes Yom Tov Echad, there's a mitzvah to be Mesamech his wife with colorful clothing, etc. And then he brings a third reason that brings here from Sefer, from somehow saying that since the husband and wife are together the whole time, therefore he has a duty to provide her needs. So somehow it's not included as giving him matanos, which I'm not sure how that works. And especially, he says, if it's L'Kavod Yom Tov, there's no Avelus, and therefore it's okay to buy her the gift. Okay, let's move on. Now I'm going to... Let's move on. So here's the next question, something which was also new stuff to me. So here's the shiur. There's a man who's, for health reasons, somehow happens to make his talis cotton. It gets soiled. It could be when he's eating, it drips, whatever it may be. And so one after the other, his talis cotton, talisim ktanim, are getting very soiled in the front. And these wool talisim ktanim are not easy to wash effectively. And so I have here a bunch of talisim ktanim, which are, the front is not wearable, and the back is. So his good lady is asking whether she would be able to cut the talisim ktanim at the shoulders and then combine two backs into one. And so she'll, from, let's say, 6 unusable talisim ktanim, she'll be able to now generate 3 kosher talisim ktanim. By taking the backs and the fronts, she'll discard in a respectful way, but they she'll be able to salvage, to use these instead of buying new ones again and again. So I'll tell you at Bahashkofa Rishoin, I said it's okay. And then I looked into it more carefully, and I then sent a message that it's not okay. And I'm going to go through this carefully. Why I did say it's okay, and why I'm retracting from that. So here you have on the screen in Siman Tez Alter Rebbe's Shulchan Aruch, where I'm sure everyone's familiar. Let's say you have a tzitzis snapped off the corner of a garment, corner of a talis cotton. To take that tzitzis and sew it back with thread, that's not okay. And the term in Halocho is ta'aseh v'lo min ha'osur b'psul. For that matter, if you cut off a corner from a talis cotton or a talis, and you sew it onto another talis, so the halacha says that's not okay. On this, says the Alter Rebbe, by medvorim amurim, that which you cannot bring a patch with a tzitzis hanging and sew it into the garment. That's only when the imported patch she'ein b'chaticha hahi, when that imported patch does not have a shiur talis shechayeves b'tzitzis. If that imported patch doesn't have a shiur of a talis. But if the patch which you want to now connect to the existing talis does have a shiur of talis, then you do not have to undo the tzitzis on it, and you can sew it together. So let's say, let's say you have a garment which has got 3 tzitzis, and now you bring over a patch which has got 1 tzitzit, and that is valid. Why? Because the patch is not the patch which you're bringing has also got a shiur talis. So theoretically, if you had two talesim, you had a talis god, or two talesim gedolim, and they're ripped down the middle, you could take, let's say one of them is a part is not usable. You could take the two halves, or half of A and half of B, and join them together. That would be okay, because each section has a shiur talis. Now, what is the minimum size of a talis cotton? So the way we have in the Alter Rebbe, we know, now in Shulchan Aruch, this is discussed indeed in Siman Tes Zayin. It doesn't say clear measurements. It talks about if it is enough to cover Rosh Veruba Shel Cotton Ben Tesha Shonim, enough to cover the majority of the body of a 9-year-old, and a godel, and an adult would be okay to go out in the street with such a garment, derech arai, for a short, just for it wouldn't work. It's a bit too small. Now, the Alter Rebbe indeed does talk about amo al amo, and then he says amo al amo milfonov, amo al amo mil acharov. So effectively, our talesim ktanim are 2 amas long, plus the area of the neck, and 1 amma wide. That's what the Alter Rebbe says. She says the Alter Rebbe is quite verbose there. He says, if it's one you want to do so, lots of lidei choladeis, because there are those who say it's much less than that. And so there are those who say, and Kitzur Shonach brings such an opinion, that it's a half an amma wide and 3/4 of an amma long. On that basis, okay, so I was saying to myself, an amo al amo has got a shiur talis. All right, so there's a chumrah, the Alter Rebbe says, amo al amo milfonav, amo al amo mil acharov. Well, there are those who say that even it's half an amma wide and 3/4 of an amma long, that's also big enough. Then I saw something which was news to me. Sorry, and that is in Piskei Teshuvos. He writes here that this shiur of 3/4 of an amma length and 1/2 amma width, that's mikol tzad. So he's talking about that this length of 3/4 by a half in the front of the body and in the back of the body. If that's the case, an amo al amo, no way does it have a shiur. Well, it doesn't have a shiur atifa. So now I'm learning something new. Until now, I knew that there's a shiur, the way it's written in Kitzur Shulchan Aruch, half an amma wide, 3/4 of an amma long, and you look around, you see these small tzitzis, which look about the size of the Choshen Mishpat, Zeres al Zeres, but in the front, and Zeres al Zeres in the back. And I've seen even adults wearing such small tzitzis. Well, they're relying on this shiur of 3/4 of an amma being the need of the overall length of the tzitzis. And now they're saying, no, you have to have 3/4 in the front, 3/4 in the back. I don't think that's the minig ha'olam. Fine. But that's not really my concern is not so much that. Now we're talking about amo al amo. And the Alter Rebbe does bring in in the Siddur that for Ktanim you can make a beged on amo al amo. Which means half an arm in the front, half an arm in the back. No one does this now, though, by the way, because actually there was one manufacturer who tried to do it, but for a child, a 5-year-old, a 6-year-old, to have a beged which is an amma wide is just very, very difficult for them to wear. So I'm not dealing with that now. Coming back, so is there any basis to say that an amo al amo is a shiur beged? So here you have the Gemara in Menachos, Brisa, Tanya Namihochi, Talis shenikra chutz l'sholish yitper. If a talis got torn, outside 3, that's boys, I think, from the edge, you can sew it. Toich sholish. If it's within the 3, it's boys from the edge. You're not allowed to sew it. That's got to do with the worry that you use some thread to sew it, and then that thread might get mixed up with the thread of the actual tzitzis. Okay. Meanwhile, V'shovin shel yovi amo afilu amo al amo mimokim acher ubot cheles v'toileba. You cannot bring a patch which is an amo square and connect it to a garment because of what we said. This idea is it's too it's of a class of Elohim Osui. So here you have a Gemara Mufureshes that amo al amo is not enough to be considered a shiur beged, and if you attach it to another garment, it's not going to be kosher. Now, as I said, the Alter Rebbe mentions a shiur of amo al amo, and this comes from there's a Charles Chuvas called Pri Haaretz. This is going back probably 300 years ago or something. And I looked it up, and I really didn't. He brings from this Gemara itself, he wants to bring a raya that Amal Amma is enough. Why does Gemara mention Amal Amma? My understanding is on the contrary. This is that it's saying here that it's not a shiur tzitzis, not a shiur beged, and that's why you from mechaber one to the other. So really, I spent time going through this, and I had to come to the conclusion that amol amol is not a shiur talus shechayeves b'tzitzis, and therefore, if you take two backs of tzitzis, each one amol amol, but they're not big enough to be called a talus, and therefore this, which is said here that you're allowed to combine two halves, may be true for a large talus, but to do what this Isha Tzitkonis was proposing, to take two backs and join them together, fortunately, I think that is not okay. What else do we have here? Okay, so Bocher asks a question that he has a mouse in his bedroom. And it got caught in a trap. So what can he do about it? So I did see, he says here, are you allowed to feed a mouse? Because here, and this is from Piskei Teshuvos, and Simashin Zayin, he writes here from Kovis Beis Levi that you're allowed to feed, well, really you're not allowed to feed animals on Shabbos, which are not your responsibility. But if it's been trapped, so now it's your responsibility to feed it. Interesting. But then he says something which was my reaction. The following. If you've got this mouse in the corner of your room trapped in some kind of a glue trap or something, and it's making little noises the whole time. Now that's for most people would be an absolute, I don't know, really be bothering the person. And because of that, we have a din of graf shelrei. So a mouse, alive or dead, is muksa. But there is a halacha that graf shelrei, if you have a quantity of feces or anything which is objectionable, so then there's a concept that kovid habriya is godel kovid habriya, especially sidrabanon, that you are allowed to violate the sidrabanon, in this case muksa, in order to protect the respect for human life. And therefore, you'd be allowed to take the whole trap with the mouse and put it outside in the garden. I'm not Hashem, not to Rosh Hashanah, but to put it out in the garden. And you wanted to release it there, that's up to you. But you would be allowed to lift it up if its presence is so offensive to you. So then you would be allowed to pick it up and take it away. If you are happy to leave it there and enjoy the entertainment, well, then you could leave it there, and you want to feed it. You're allowed to feed it. Yeah, that's very, very helpful to know. Right. The last thing which we have, and this has been in the Hilchos, in the Rambam, which we just started, Hilchos Shabbos, so the beginning of Perek Beis, which was yesterday's Shiur Rambam, Mutar lahaskil b'melacha be'erev Shabbos. You're allowed to begin a job on Friday, begin a work on Friday, even though shehini gemeres me'ileho b'Shabbos, even though it's going to continue and it will finish off the job on Shabbos, because it's only also for us to do. We're not allowed to do melacha on this day. If it happens by itself on Shabbos, we're allowed to have benefit from it. It happened by itself. Now, it's very interesting how the Rambam starts off with mutar lahaschil b'melacha, that you're allowed to start, and it continues. And then he finishes off, the heter is because it happened by itself. Now, we have actually a situation which I'm bringing up. Let's say you have these vacuum cleaners which sit in the corner of the living room, and they are like robots. It's a round thing, and it's when at 12 o'clock at night, whatever time you set it, it gets out of the corner and starts rotating, going around the room, and wherever it can, and it's nothing blocking it, it's going to vacuum the floor. And then once it's finished, it goes back to its corner, it goes back to sleep. So now it starts the melacha at 12 o'clock at night. So it's maskil b'melacha. On the other hand, it's nasa me'elo. It's happening by itself. And I did see when it talks about why you're allowed to leave a lamp to burn on Shabbos, isn't the oil, there's fresh oil coming into the flame, which is being burnt, havor. So the Shalmi says a svara that kol tipo v'tipo ninaro, that when you light it, all the oil in the lamp is kind of in motion to move towards the flame. So it's all started on Friday. So the Yerushalmi seems to be clear that something which starts on Shabbos is not okay, and the Rambam seems to be, well, the diuk of the Reisha is if it starts on Erev Shabbos, sorry, if it starts on Shabbos, that would not be okay. It's not so poshut. There's a separate halacha if stuff was made on Shabbos, whether you're allowed to have benefit from it. Namely, if, let's say, if a goyish baker baked bread on Shabbos, he took flour and made bread. And let's say it's not a problem of a pasakum, whatever it may be, and there's an Erev, are you allowed to enjoy that bread? And this is the Simon Shiur Chofei, the Alter Rebbe brings the shitta of the Marshal. That which you're allowed to have benefit is only if it started on Friday and finished on Shabbos. So if you had raw food and with the precautions included, and it was cooking from Erev Shabbos into Shabbos, on Shabbos you'd not have benefit because it started on Shabbos, before Shabbos. In the case of the bread baked by the goy, it started on Shabbos, and therefore you're not allowed to use that bread according to the Marshal. So that's it's talking about using the bread. Here we're talking about whether I'm allowed to set in motion a setting that you'll start a melacha on Shabbos. So now, what you have here is also from the Piskei Teshuvos, and this is the beginning of Simmeration on base, where we have this psak of Rebbe Moshe Feinstein, that the heter, which is certainly widely accepted to use a Shabbos clock, is only for things which are tzorech HaShabbos and covered and oinig of Shabbos, namely lighting, heating, or cooling, etc. So those things are accepted. We use time switches for them to activate them on Shabbos. But as to use a time switch to activate another melacha happening, so then they're saying it's not okay. The story is told that this was Moshe Feinstein's reaction when he heard that the Shiloh, someone they were a fan of the Yankees or the Dodgers, whatever. They were desperate; they couldn't handle not seeing the match. Wanted to know whether they can set a time switch so that what we were told in school, the tumor box, be able to see the tumor box on Shabbos afternoon. And says Rebbe Moshe lashes out. He says, actually, now with all these robots, which are becoming more and more common. He says it's the same thing as it's if the same thing as Amir al-Nochri. The reason for why Chachamim forbade us having a guy do work for us is also of Shabbos. You can have a whole business running, and so the Alter Rebbe does say the word of shlichus. And I think that's the halacha profile. But the reason, the motive for the issue of Amir al-Nachri is because of Zilzal Shabbos. You could have a whole business running, business as usual, and have a goyish workers. And so that would be a Zilzal Shabbos, a total distraction from Shabbos. So Rebbe takes the view that using a time switch for anything else would be is also fine. And so that's generally what's generally follows. I would say, according to this, not to use this vacuum bot, whatever it's called, on Shabbos. Now, someone said that actually Rabbi Broin recently gave a shiur where he spoke about the using these robots on Shabbos, and there's also this discussion which I raised: Are you allowed to start a malacha? Are you allowed to make a setting that a melacha should start on Shabbos? As I pointed out, the diukim of the Rambam here are contradictory. Where at the beginning he says mutar lahaschil b'melacha me'erev Shabbos, and the end he says b'mashe nas me'elov Shabbos. So if it's nas Shabbos me'elov and it started on Shabbos, what's the position there? At any rate, so someone sent me a reference to the Encyclopedia Talmudis under the entry of Chashmal. I didn't have a chance to look it up. I only got it. I'm traveling now, so I didn't have a chance to look it up. And Bez Hashem will follow that up. I mean, I am intrigued how to reconcile the contradictory remozim in the Lashon of the Rambam. But we also discussed this briefly. It came up in the weekday shiur, in the evening, about talking about websites being open on Shabbos, and what's the difference between having a vending machine open on Shabbos and having a website open on Shabbos. Now, he was actually stumped at the time. So I was happy to see that the Piskei Teshuvos addresses this. Now, having vending machines have been around for 100 years, probably. And Teshuvos Marshag, who was a Rov in Hungary pre-war, he says you are allowed to have a vending machine open on Shabbos in a goyish area, in a train station, etc. You sell chocolates, etc. And he says that you're not doing anything. And one of the main points is that the chocolates which you sell on Shabbos could equally have been bought on Friday or on Sunday. It makes no difference to you. So that's one of his strong bases for Lahater. To have it now an internet site. So here he talks about in the Piskei Teshuvos, if you have a site which is sales like Amazon kind of stuff, where I'm not going into the whole parasha of Amazon per se, but let's say it's a site and people can place an order, and then the order is fulfilled after Shabbos. So that's the same thing as having a post box. You're receiving orders, but you're not open for business. You're certainly not delivering. There's room to be more lenient. But then we have here, what about if you're not selling food or clothing, etc. online, you're actually selling information. Let's say people want to know the exchange rate of currency or whatever. It could be information, and to get that information, okay, they'll pay for the information. So that's a different story, because then it comes into Schar Shabbos. That the time on Shabbos, when this person, let's say, wants to go from A to B and wants to know the best way, traffic, no traffic, he needs to know that information now. You can't sell him that information yesterday or tomorrow. He needs it now, and you're selling it now. So that, in a way, is that you're benefiting from being open on Shabbos. That creates a problem of Schar Shabbos, which is problematic, and how you're going to circumvent that. Perhaps a way of shutfus with the goyim. I'm not sure exactly how you're going to deal with that. Right, that's what I have to share with you. I'm in Wyoming, in by my son Yaakov Yosef Semach, who's on Shlichus here with his wife and now 4 children. There's a bris on Shabbos, Bez Hashem, and so I came here to be mishtatef in the Simcha, and so I wish you all a good Shabbos and a good Tavoch, and we should hear B'Seiras Tevis, and we're coming to the month of Nisan, Chodesh Nisim. We should see Nisim and Niflois, and K'mei Tzeis Chomeretz Mitzrayim Arenu Niflois, with Moshiach Tzidkenu B'Meira Reinu Mamish, and Elyohu Mavasa Hagula should tell us, oh, Hine Zeh Bo, and V'Sar Zeh Neinenu B'Shuv Chol Tzim Berachmim. Kol Tov.